Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Horizon Post Office scandal is a horrendous miscarriage of justice that ruined hundreds of lives. Politicians of all parties will rightly reflect on what they should have done sooner. The UK Government has now acted to overturn the wrongful convictions of innocent victims. In Scotland, however, prosecutions were handled by the Crown Office, not the Post Office. So can I ask the First Minister, has he established if a consent motion to UK law is the fastest way to clear all victims here in Scotland? And will he confirm to Parliament how he'll work with the UK Government to overturn these convictions as quickly as possible?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, can I first and foremost pay tribute to Alan Bates and all the other hundreds of campaigners, sub-postmasters, all of the sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses who campaigned tirelessly over decades to ensure that they receive justice they are still waiting for. Of course, it should not have taken a TV drama for action to have to be taken. And Douglas Ross is right. There is a need for reflection for all of those involved. And the Post Office is, of course, a wholly reserved institution which is accountable to UK Government ministers. The difference, as Douglas Ross rightly points out here, is that prosecutions in Scotland have been taken forward by the Independent Crown and Prosecutor Fiscal Service. I spoke to the Lord Advocate just this morning and the Solicitor General this morning, and she is willing to provide a briefing to any MSPs that have an interest in terms of the Crown's own handling of these issues. To answer Douglas Ross's question directly, the Justice Secretary has written to her counterpart in the UK Government to say we're willing to work with the UK Government in relation to legislation they're bringing forward to overturn wrongful convictions. I think the quickest way and fastest way to do that probably would be through the LCM process, but there are a number of complexities to have to navigate and to have to work through for some of the reasons that Douglas Ross has already highlighted. So I think we will, of course, engage immediately and urgently, as we already have done with the UK Government. But what is absolutely certain, whether you are in Scotland or any other part of the United Kingdom and have been impacted and affected by this, that sub-postmasters have waited far too long for justice. They shouldn't have to wait a moment longer.
Douglas Ross.
I join the First Minister in congratulating Alan Bates and others, as I did in the House of Commons earlier this week. Victims and the public will rightly ask why it's taken so long for this deep injustice to be corrected, and multiple political parties and many individuals should have and could have acted sooner. Blame starts with the Post Office, but people are understandably looking at what others could have done. Scotland's Crown Office were made aware of concerns with the Horizon system in 2013, more than 10 years ago. Dr Andrew Tickell, a senior law lecturer at Glasgow Caledonian University, said this week, and I quote, "The revelation that the Crown Office knew of problems is huge." He continued, "Did they stop prosecuting? Did it occur to them that any of their cases before 2013 might now be unsafe because of these uncertainties?" And he added that Scotland was just at the beginning of addressing the miscarriage of justice, while England and Wales were much, much further down the line. I'm just quoting a law professor, so I'm simply asking the First Minister...
Let's hear Mr Ross.
Does he agree that the process here in Scotland needs to be accelerated?
First Minister.
I would say to Douglas Ross, first and foremost, let's remember, of course, that there is a public inquiry, of course, underway. But I think it's been well established, of course, that the inaccurate data presented by inaccurate evidence presented by the Post Office is at the very heart of the scandal. And the Post Office, of course, is accountable and has been accountable to UK Government minister and ministers over many successive UK governments. So that will all undoubtedly be a matter of interrogation and questioning by the public inquiry. In terms of the Crown Office, and I reiterate the point that Lord Advocate is willing to meet with members of the Scottish Parliament to talk them through what the Crown has done, because these are independent functions of the Crown and Procurator Fiscal Service. But my understanding is that when the Crown Office was told in 2013 by Post Office solicitors about the Horizon, the challenges around Horizon evidence, they continued that dialogue with the Post Office but immediately in September 2013, they made it aware and provided guidance to every Scottish prosecutor at the earliest possible point in time to treat cases reported by the Post Office on their individual regard to their facts and circumstances and evidence which did not rely upon Horizon. They then spent the next couple of years between 2013 and 2015 in continual dialogue with the Post Office to try to get further detail around the evidential basis. And just to conclude, the position post-2015 with regard to assurances provided is that in 2015 the Crown Prosecution Service issued instructions to all prosecutors not to proceed with any Post Office case in which a sufficiency of evidence was dependent on evidence from the Horizon system. So no cases prosecuted effectively from 2015 where the evidence was dependent on evidence from the Horizon system. In terms of where we are in relation to the process with the Scottish Criminal Case Review Commission, what I'm willing to do is work with the UK Government to look at a process which effectively en masse seeks to overturn any wrongful convictions.
Douglas Ross.
So the actions of the Post Office were despicable and probably criminal, but the actions of the Crown Office here in Scotland should trouble us greatly. There was a sudden spike in cases involving people who were some of the most trusted in their communities, but the Crown Office proceeded anyway. That was until 2013, and suddenly they decided not to proceed with a case in the Gorbals. Now, the First Minister has just articulated that it was September 2013 when the Crown Office first found out and sent out that information, but it wasn't. We know on the 29th of January 2013 that a prosecutor fiscal cited, and I quote, issues with Horizon as the reason for not proceeding with a case in January 2013, not in September 2013. Stuart Munro, convener of the Law Society of Scotland's Criminal Law Committee, said the Procurator Fiscal should have gone public. He says, and this is his quote, "The Procurator Fiscal has a legal duty to disclose relevant information of those accused of crimes, and that duty continues even after a trial is concluded. As soon as the Procurator Fiscal became aware of concerns about the reliability of Horizon, that should have been disclosed." So does the First Minister agree that Scotland's Crown Office has serious questions to answer here?
First Minister.
What I would say to Douglas Ross, and I say this genuinely in sincerity, is that the real questions, of course, are for the Post Office and, of course, the information that Post Office provided, not just to the Crown, to government ministers as well, and that is why a public inquiry is so important, and anybody who has questions to answer should cooperate with that public inquiry. But let's not forget the Post Office is a wholly reserved institution, directly accountable to UK government ministers. What I would say about questions to the Crown, and there are legitimate questions to ask of the Crown, of course, does operate independently of government ministers, and of course, as it should, operate independently of myself as the First Minister. So there are questions, very legitimate questions, that individuals and indeed members of this chamber will have for the Crown Office. I repeat what Lord Advocate told me this morning. She is more than happy to provide a briefing to members of the Parliament that have an interest. I will end by reiterating the points I made at the very beginning, which is that sub-postmasters, sub-postmistresses have waited far too long for justice. It's incumbent on all of us to ensure that we not just get them access to that justice, but access to compensation too.
Douglas Ross.
The UK-wide inquiry, which the First Minister has mentioned, will look at all of these issues, and it's right, it continues to scrutinise what happened. But we must examine the unique circumstances in Scotland where the Crown Office were responsible for prosecutions of innocent people. If the Crown Office knew of specific problems more than a decade ago, that raises serious questions. We don't know what they did, if anything, with that information. The Horizon Post Office scandal has devastated lives. It is the most appalling miscarriage of justice. Good people were criminalised because of an IT failure they had nothing to do with and a cover-up that lasted for years. It's right that no stone is left unturned in seeking answers. The Crown Office in Scotland must be transparent. Prosecutors were aware of issues with the flawed Horizon system more than 10 years ago. So, First Minister, we don't need meetings or briefings from the Lord Advocate. We need her here in Parliament to answer questions about this scandal. Does the First Minister agree that the Lord Advocate should urgently come to this Parliament to answer questions?
First Minister.
Again, can I just remind Douglas Ross, and this is a really important point, of course, that the Lord Advocate, when she discharges her functions as head of the prosecution service, she does so independently of me. When I spoke to the Lord Advocate this morning, she was more than happy to consider whether it was a briefing, whether it was a ministerial statement, whatever was appropriate, she was willing to consider that. And I'm certain the Lord Advocate is listening to these exchanges. And of course, it will be for her to determine in her independent function as head of the prosecution service on terms of how she should answer any of those questions. Let me reiterate the point here that Scottish prosecutors were told in September 2013 to treat cases reported by the Post Office in regard to their facts and circumstances and evidence which did not rely upon Horizon. So they should be reported on their individual regard. Then, of course, no cases were prosecuted from 2015 where the sufficiency of evidence was dependent on the evidence from the Horizon system. And my understanding, again, from the conversations I've had with the Lord Advocate, is that the engagement with the Post Office between 2013 and 2015, the Crown Office were assured by Post Office and their legal representatives that issues that arise with the Horizon system in England did not impact on any live Scottish cases. So they continued to seek those assurances and then took the action that they did in both 2013 and 2015 as well. Presiding Officer, I simply end where I started. Time and time again, sub-postmasters, sub-postmistresses were telling the UK government, they were telling ministers in the UK government that the body that they are wholly responsible for, the Post Office, was lying. They were simply not telling the truth about the Horizon system. Time and time again, they were not listened to. They have waited far too long for justice. They waited far too long for compensation. This government will work with the UK government to ensure they get access to not just justice, but access to the compensation they so rightly deserve.